presentation on the United States system of government, federal democracy, and separation of powers. Asha Taylor, Jade, and Miranda. The 10th Amendment, put simply, is whatever powers are not delegated specifically to the federal government in the Constitution are given to the states. This is outlined in Article 1, Section 8, which is the express powers, which are the powers specifically given to the federal government by the Constitution. This includes declaring war, regulating commerce, and managing armed forces. And any of those laws that are not specifically given to the federal government are laws such as marriage, DMV, education, gun regulations, and other laws that vary from state to state on how they enforce them and how they regulate them within their state. In the textbook, it points out that the 10th Amendment allows federalism, which is the relationship between the state and federal government, to function properly because it allows for there to be equal power in both, and the problem that we had in the Articles of Confederation with the federal government having too much power no longer exists because the states get more power. The video says that any power not listed in the Constitution is given to the states. Express powers. Express powers are what we talked about in Article 1, Section 8, which are the powers specifically delegated to the federal government by the Constitution. This is outlined in Article 1, Section 8, and also Article 2 and 3, which is for the president. Yes. And then the connection to the textbook is that although there is more and more management from the federal government, this still keeps it in check because the states get a lot of the power, which again was a problem during the Articles of Confederation because the colonists were afraid of a monarchy, but this allowed for the states that have more power and the federal government to have enough power to regulate properly. Implied powers. Implied powers are powers that are not given specifically to the federal government in the U.S. Constitution, but they are deemed necessary and proper by the Elastic Clause, which is Article 1, Section 8 as well, which means that Congress has the authority to implement powers that they don't have specifically in the Constitution as long as it relates directly to one of these delegated powers. A delegated power is the same as an express power, but it's just a different name. And as long as according to the textbook, as long as it helps achieve constitutional responsibilities, as long as it helps one of these delegated powers execute one of these delegated powers, it will be deemed constitutional. But the video explains that Hamilton did this with the National Bank because it wasn't put in the Constitution, but we needed it to function properly. So therefore, it was deemed necessary and proper. And this is in Clause 18, where it asks you to rationalize if it is needed in order for these delegated powers to work. The Supremacy Clause. The Supremacy Clause is a clause that says the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. The Constitution trumps all state law. This is in Article 6 of the Constitution, which has 3 parts. Debt phrasing. Debt phrasing just means that any debt that was in the Articles of Confederation transfers over to the Constitution. They're still paying it. Second is supreme law over the states. Any law in the federal court, such as the 14th Amendment, which gives equal protection to marriage, which means all those states have the right to regulate marriage. It cannot prohibit things like gay marriage because that is federal law. Oath qualification just means every elected official has to take oaths to the Constitution. Something I found interesting in the video was that there was a religion aspect to which they think Jefferson slipped in there. It was just kind of random. And then in the textbook it says the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Elastic Clause. This relates to the implied powers. The Elastic Clause is what allows the implied powers to happen. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18 says that you have to rationalize an implied power by saying, will this help execute a delegated power? If it does not, then it cannot be constitutional. And many people, they need straight diction, or they can be more lenient. It depends on your ideology. In the video, it says that as long as it can be rationalized as necessary and proper, it can be passed through the elastic clauses. In the textbook, it says that anything to do with interstate commerce, so trade in between states, roads in between states, that has to be regulated by the federal government because that would be conflicts in the states, and this kind of helps with the implied powers. And in the bicameral system, the Elastic Clause helps the modern government because the founding fathers could not foresee like all the problems that we were going to have and the federal government was going to have in the future. So the Elastic Clause allows us to kind of work in our modern problems, and it allows for the states and the federal government to work together in a way that helps with the status quo. Regulatory laws. Regulatory laws. So the Alaska Clause allows for the regulatory laws to be put in place because this is just like the steps that a bill has to do before it becomes a law. So it starts in Congress, where they have these special agencies which they go over the diction in the bill, and they see if they specialize in these areas and allow it to look over it multiple times. They put it out to the public can vote on it. It gets edited multiple times before it even goes to Congress. Then it goes to the House of Representatives, then it goes to the Senate. And once it's passed in both of those, the president, it goes to the president's desk, and he can either sign it or veto it. And then if it's vetoed, it has to go back and it has to be voted on. But if it's signed by the president, then it goes out, and the courts can then limit it by saying, oh, is this constitutional or not? And if it's not constitutional, it gets struck down, and then they have to edit it again. So it's always being checked by these different levels of government. For our opinion, we think that there's too many regulatory agencies. They're important because they help to make sure these laws are good, but there's too many of them, and we need to broaden what they're specialized in because we do not get enough bills to pass. And it's okay if we get more bills to pass than are good because the courts can still limit it. They still have that power. They need to be broadened. Constitution amended. For the Constitution to get amended, there needs to be a two-thirds vote in the House of Representatives and Senate and 3/4 of the votes in the states. The 13th Amendment abolishes slavery. It also protects sex discrimination and race discrimination, and that has to do with the Supremacy Clause, so states can't make any laws to deal with that. And then taxes has to do with the Elastic Clause and an income tax because that's not specifically in the Constitution. And the 21st Amendment is to do with prohibition, and that also deals with the Supremacy Clause because the states cannot make laws about the age of alcohol because of the federal government. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed our presentation.